Welcome to the debate. Picture a man who just commanded fire to fall from the sky.
A literal inferno.
Right. He stands on a mountain, having single-handedly humiliated an entire national priesthood. He's watching a soaked stone altar incinerate in this blinding flash of divine authority.
He is the ultimate untouchable victor.
Exactly. Yet, just hours later, this exact same man is sprinting into the desolate wilderness, absolutely paralyzed by terror. I mean, he collapses in the dirt begging for death, and it's all because of a single threat from one woman.
It is a terrifying psychological paradox. You have this towering figure of biblical history, Elijah, who is traditionally presented to us as this invincible superhero of faith.
Right, the Sunday school version.
Exactly. But when you actually strip away that polish and analyze the historical source material, you're confronted with a deeply unsettling contradiction. The man who wielded the power of the cosmos breaks down completely.
And that contradiction is exactly what we are investigating today. Because the traditional narrative, well, it simply falls apart under scrutiny. It forces us to ask a central question about this text.
Which is whether the Elijah narrative is fundamentally a strategic cosmic war designed to systematically humiliate the fertility god Baal.
Or conversely, is it actually a covert internal operation by God to mercilessly deconstruct the hubris and the theological assumptions of his own prophet?
Right.
I will be arguing that the text documents a relentless, calculated military campaign. The multi-year drought, the endless provision of flour for a starving widow, and the explosive fire on Mount Carmel, they weren't random miracles.
You see them as surgical strikes.
Precisely. Strikes designed to prove the absolute impotence of Baal over his own supposed jurisdictions.
And I will be arguing that viewing this solely as a war on Baal is frankly a superficial reading, one that just collapses under the weight of Elijah's psychological breakdown. The true narrative is the deconstruction of the prophet himself.
Okay, so the battleground wasn't just Israel.
No, the battleground was Elijah's own mind. By forcing him to watch his own divinely appointed resources dry up, and by revealing himself not in the violent forces of nature, but in a delicate whisper, God was actively tearing down Elijah's dangerous addiction to, spectacular fiery manifestations of power.
Well, let's start with the opening move then, because I think the sheer scale of the strategy here proves my point about this being a calculated campaign. Elijah walks into the royal court, a nobody from the arid mountains of Gilead, and declares that the sky will be shut.
No dew, no rain.
Right, except by his word. And we really have to understand what dangerous syncretism actually looked like on the ground in ancient Israel. The people hadn't entirely abandoned Yahweh.
No, they were hedging their bets.
Exactly. They worshipped Yahweh for their national identity, but they were praying to Baal to water their crops. I mean, in ancient Ugaritic texts, Baal is literally titled the rider of the clouds. He was the god of the storm.
He was the one who supposedly held the keys to the sky.
Precisely. So when Elijah says the sky is shut, it isn't just bad weather. It is a direct, visceral theological assault. It is locking Baal out of his own house.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful image.
When the sky turns to iron for 3 years, it is a public, unavoidable declaration of Baal's non-existence. The crisis became a language. Every dry riverbed, every failing crop, every dying animal, it was a loud broadcast that their chosen deity was completely powerless.
Right.
It's a masterclass in exposing an ideological fraud, basically, by starving its followers of the very thing the ideology promised to provide.
I hear you, but you're focusing entirely on the battlefield map, and you're completely ignoring the friendly fire.
What do you mean?
Well, if this was just about starving Baal's worshippers to prove a geopolitical point, why does God lead his own obedient prophet into hiding at the brook of Cherith? And more importantly, why does God let that exact brook slowly dry up into nothing?
To protect him from Ahab?
But Elijah is sitting there watching the water level drop day by day until it's just dry stones. It's like a commanding general intentionally burning his own best soldiers' supply lines.
But isn't that just a tactical retreat? I mean, God removes his prophet from the political crosshairs and sustains him through the ravens. It's unconventional, certainly, but bringing meat and bread via scavenger birds is still a demonstration of absolute sovereignty over nature.
Which is Baal's supposed domain.
Exactly.
I completely disagree. Calling it a tactical retreat misses the psychological torment of what Elijah is experiencing. Let me explain why.
Go ahead.
If it was just about survival, God could have kept the brook flowing indefinitely. He's God. Letting the brook dry up breaks the simplistic transactional theology that says, if I obey God, I will always be comfortable.
Huh. So he's stripping away the entitlement.
Yes, Elijah was exactly where God told him to be, doing exactly what God told him to do, and his water source still vanished. He had to learn absolute, terrifying desperation. People confuse the channel with the source. They think their job or their status or their brook is what keeps them alive.
And God deliberately starves his own prophet to shatter that illusion.
Right. Elijah had to be dismantled in the silence of the desert before he could be trusted with power.
You're arguing the drawing brook is an internal lesson, but let me push back by looking at where the text immediately moves him. Because when the brook dries up, it acts as the mechanism to push him into enemy territory. God sends him to Zarephath.
Right, in Sidon.
And we need to clarify the geopolitical stakes here. Zarephath was in Sidonian territory. It was Jezebel's backyard. Her father, Ethbaal, was the king of the Sidonians and a former high priest of Baal.
So he's walking into the lion's den?
Going to Zarephath is the equivalent of a spy walking directly into the enemy's capital city. And what happens? He meets a starving widow gathering wood for her final meal. Elijah tells her the flour and oil won't run out, and it doesn't.
The endless provision.
Yes. This is God invading Baal's home turf and proving he can sustain life where the fertility god has utterly failed.
It is an invasion, yes, but look at the human cost that immediately follows. If this is just a strategic military operation, why does the text pivot to a grieving mother?
You mean when the son dies?
Exactly. Even after this incredible daily provision, the widow's son falls severely ill and dies. The very woman who just experienced an ongoing miracle is now holding the corpse of her child. Again, your theology of spectacular triumph falls apart here.
How so? He resurrects the boy?
Eventually, yes. But the widow accuses Elijah of bringing her sin to light, and Elijah himself cries out to God in total distress. I mean, he has to stretch himself out over the boy's body, praying desperately. It isn't a clean, clinical victory.
It's messy.
It's agonizing. The process forces Elijah to confront the reality that his proximity to divine power does not grant immunity from profound grief. He isn't just a weapon. He is being shaped by sorrow. God is teaching him empathy, not just authority.
Okay, if God is teaching him quiet empathy and deconstructing his reliance on spectacle, how does your quiet whisper theory survive what happens next?
Mount Carmel?
Yes, because the minute he leaves that widow's house, God sends him to Mount Carmel to stage the loudest, most spectacular public execution in biblical history. It is the undeniable climax of the campaign.
It's definitely loud.
You have hundreds of Baal's prophets crying out, cutting themselves, dancing from morning until noon, and there is nothing but silence. Then Elijah meticulously rebuilds the altar of the Lord with 12 stones, reminding this fractured, divided nation of their original covenant.
Right.
And then he orders precious water to be poured over the sacrifice and the wood, filling the trench.
Which makes the impending fire completely impossible to fake.
Exactly. He eliminates any possibility of human manipulation. When the fire falls, it is violent. It consumes the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and literally licks up the water in the trench.
It's a terrifying display.
The entire nation falls on their faces screaming that the Lord is God. That is not a deconstruction of the prophet. That is a coronation. It is the ultimate vindication of divine authority.
I fundamentally disagree. Calling Carmel a total victory completely ignores the political and the psychological reality of the very next morning. I argue that the spectacle at Carmel was, in many ways, a strategic failure.
A failure? He turned the entire nation back to God in a single afternoon. How can you look at a nation falling on its face and call that a failure?
Did he change the nation, or did he just shock them for a day? Look at the immediate aftermath. The fire consumed the altar, but it did not consume the corruption of the throne. Ahab goes back to his palace and tells Jezebel what happened.
And she issues the threat.
Does she repent? No. She sends a single death threat to Elijah. And the man who just stared down hundreds of false prophets, the man who called fire from the sky, absolutely shatters. He runs for his life, sits under a broom tree, and asks God to kill him.
It's a severe crash.
If Carmel was a total victory, why is the victor suicidal 24 hours later?
Because human beings have physiological limits. The adrenaline wears off, the physical exhaustion of outrunning a chariot sets in. The text points out that God ministers to him physically. An angel gives him baked bread and water and lets him sleep.
Right, the physical toll is real.
It's a profound acknowledgement of the body's toll. But an adrenaline crash doesn't negate the theological victory on the mountain.
It's not just an adrenaline crash, though. It is a complete shattering of his worldview. Elijah was suffering from a massive Messiah complex. Let's look at the psychological mechanism of what is happening under that broom tree.
Okay, unpack that.
Elijah actually believed his own press. He thought the spectacular fire would change the system. He believed that one dramatic, undeniable display of power would cure the structural, generational cancer of Israel's leadership.
And it didn't.
When Jezebel didn't even blink at the fire from heaven, Elijah realized that spectacles change behavior for a day, but they rarely change entrenched power systems. That is the devastating reality he had to face.
So the disillusionment breaks him.
Exactly. If you think one big win is going to fix everything, and then you get that win and nothing changes, your mind breaks. He thought he was the last faithful man on earth. His perception was entirely distorted by trauma.
Which is why God takes this broken prophet to Mount Horeb, to a cave, to address that trauma.
Yes. And this sequence at Horeb is the true climax of the narrative, not Carmel. God shows Elijah a great and powerful wind that tears the mountains apart, but God is not in the wind. Then an earthquake, but God is not in the earthquake. Think about that. Fire, Elijah's signature element, the very thing he just used to supposedly win the nation. But God is not in the fire. Finally, there is a still, small, delicate whisper, and it is only then that Elijah covers his face with his cloak. You have to answer this. Why would God use fire to win the nation, but a whisper to save the prophet?
Because the nation needed the sensory shock to break their syncretism. They needed the undeniable dismantling of their false security. But the prophet needed to know that God's sovereign control is not limited to the dramatic.
Exactly.
I concede that distinction. However, I am genuinely stuck on your logic here. If the goal is to wean Elijah off the spectacular, walk me through the mechanics of his departure from earth.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, if God wants to dismantle Elijah's reliance on spectacle, why follow up the quiet whisper by taking him to heaven in a literal explosion of fire? Elijah and his successor, Elisha, are walking near the Jordan River, and suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appear, violently separating them, and Elijah is taken up in a whirlwind.
Ah, the chariot.
The prophet of fire is extracted by fire. It completely cements his legacy as a spectacular weapon. It seems like a massive contradiction to your point.
It only seems like a contradiction if you fall for the visual trap the text sets for us. And honestly, if you ignore the deep Hebrew translation anomalies in 2 Kings.
Wait, what anomalies?
The chariot of fire is meant to mesmerize you, but it is a distraction. If you are looking up at the sky at the blazing horses, you are missing the entire theological payload of the scene. And you're missing what the Hebrew actually says happened.
Walk me through the Hebrew then.
Okay, so Sunday school tradition says Elijah rode a chariot of fire into heaven, right? But the text in 2 Kings 2:11 explicitly says that the Rekev Esh, the chariot of fire, and the horses of fire merely separated the 2 men.
They drove between them.
Exactly. Elijah did not ride the chariot. The text says Elijah went up to heaven in a se'arah, a whirlwind. The fiery chariot was just the barrier. The dramatic spectacle was actually pushing Elisha away, creating distance.
Okay, that is a massive textual nuance. So the true climax isn't what goes up into the whirlwind.
No, the true climax is what falls down into the dirt.
You're referring to the mantle.
Yes, the Adoret. And we need to explain what a mantle actually was in the ancient Near East because it wasn't just a warm jacket. In ancient Near Eastern culture, a person's outer garment represented their identity, their rights, and their legal standing.
It was a symbol of authority.
Casting a mantle over someone was a recognized legal mechanism for adoption or the transfer of an office. When Elijah's mantle falls to the dirt, the era of the spectacular, fiery prophet ends, and the authority transfers to Elisha.
Let's look at Elisha then, because the contrast between them is stark. Elijah was a man of the wilderness. Elisha was a common man of the plow. When Elisha first called him, Elisha was working his fields.
Right.
Elisha literally burned his plowing equipment and sacrificed his oxen to feed the people, severing his ties to his old life.
Exactly. Elisha wasn't a zealot. For years, he walked in Elijah's shadow, doing the quiet, unglamorous work. And when Elisha picks up that fallen mantle, notice what he does with the authority.
It's totally different.
His ministry is radically different from Elijah's. Elisha doesn't call down fire to incinerate altars. His first major act is going to a city where the water is toxic and the land is barren. He takes a bowl of salt, throws it into the spring, and heals the water at its source.
It's an act of intimate, localized restoration.
Yes.
He also encounters a desperate widow whose sons are about to be taken into slavery because of her dead husband's debt. He doesn't stage a national showdown with the creditors. He asks her what she has in her house. She has a little oil.
Just a little oil.
He tells her to gather empty jars and shut the door. In the absolute quiet privacy of her home, away from crowds or kings, the oil multiplies until every jar is full, saving her family from slavery.
And that is the whisper materialized. Elisha's ministry is the realization of the still small whisper that Elijah experienced at Horeb. The spectacle of the fiery chariot, or rather the whirlwind that took him, was just the dramatic conclusion of an era.
So Elijah was the earthquake and the fire.
Meant to shatter a corrupt system, yes, but you cannot build a house during an earthquake. Elisha was the whisper. He was the one walking through the impoverished villages, dealing with the grief, the crippling debt, and the sickness of everyday people.
He proved that God wasn't just a cosmic warrior fighting Baal on the mountaintops, but a deeply personal presence in the homes of the broken.
Exactly.
So if we are looking at this historical material objectively, we are forced to synthesize these two positions and hold a terrifying paradox together. We cannot discard the fire, nor can we ignore the whisper.
No, we need both.
God is entirely willing to act as an all-consuming fire to shatter national illusions. He will dismantle the false security of an entire society, drawing up their resources to expose the emptiness of whatever idols they are trusting in.
But, and this is the crucial part, he also demands that his followers ultimately learn to find him in the absolute vulnerability of a quiet whisper.
In the hiddenness of a cave.
In the slow, unglamorous, generational work of restoring toxic waters.
And we have to acknowledge the unsettling reality that this ancient text refuses to resolve neatly for us.
Which is that victory doesn't mean peace. Right. A profound, world-altering spiritual victory does not grant you immunity from severe psychological and emotional collapse. You can stand on Mount Carmel, command the elements, thoroughly defeat the opposition, and the very next morning find yourself sitting in the dirt, begging for it all to end because the systemic problems remain.
The text doesn't sanitize Elijah's depression.
Not at all. It doesn't offer a tidy resolution where his theological victory cures his trauma. It shows us a God who meets the broken prophet in the dirt, lets him sleep, feeds him, and eventually whispers to him.
Which honestly completely demolishes our modern craving for constant, spectacular proof. We naturally want the fire. We want the undeniable, viral moment of triumph that proves we are right and everyone else is wrong.
We want the blazing chariot.
Exactly. We are constantly looking up at the sky, waiting for the chariot of fire to validate us, completely missing the fact that the true power lies in the quiet passing of the mantle.
Because building your house on the demand for constant spectacle is like trying to build a foundation out of lightning strikes. It is thrilling for a second, but it cannot sustain you.
That's a great way to put it.
Eventually, the brook is going to dry up. Eventually, the fire won't fall when you want it to, or the system won't change even when you win. And when the silence comes, if you don't know how to listen for the whisper, you will shatter just like Elijah did.
The passing of the mantle to Elijah proves that the work outlasts the spectacular moments.
The men pass away, the whirlwinds vanish into the sky, but the heavy, unseen weight of that mantle remains in the dirt, waiting to be picked up.
And that leaves us with a lingering, uncomfortable question as we look at the mechanics of the fire and the dirt. When the adrenaline finally fades, when the brook runs dry, and when the sky is completely empty of chariots, what exactly are our altars built upon?